December 7, 1941. Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters, Tokyo. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo studied the reconnaissance photographs scattered across his mahogany desk. Images that showed the devastating success of the Pearl Harbor attack just hours earlier. The American Pacific Fleet lay in ruins, battleships capsized or sinking, cruisers burning, destroyers scattered like broken toys across the harbor's oily surface. But Nagumo's attention focused on one particular set of photographs that showed the aircraft carriers Enterprise and Lexington, both fortunately absent from Pearl Harbor during the attack. His intelligence officers had briefed him extensively on American naval construction capabilities, assuring him that damaged American warships would require months or even years to repair, just as Japanese vessels did when they suffered serious battle damage. The photographs confirmed what every experienced naval officer knew. Complex warships were irreplaceable strategic assets that, once damaged, would remain out of action for extended periods while skilled craftsmen performed the delicate work of restoration. But what Admiral Nagumo could never have imagined was that American shipyards were already preparing to demonstrate an approach to naval repair that would revolutionize maritime warfare and render Japanese strategic calculations meaningless. Japanese naval doctrine in 1941 was built upon centuries of maritime tradition that viewed warships as precious, irreplaceable assets, requiring careful preservation and meticulous maintenance. The Imperial Navy's approach to ship construction and repair followed the same artisanal principles that had made Japanese craftsmanship legendary throughout Asia. Master shipwrights worked alongside apprentices in naval yards that functioned more like ancient guilds than modern industrial facilities. Each warship was considered a unique creation, built with individual attention to detail and repaired with the same careful craftsmanship that had gone into its original construction. When the carrier Shokaku suffered damage during the Battle of the Coral Sea, Japanese naval experts estimated that proper repairs would require at least 6 months of careful work by skilled artisans who understood every rivet, every welded joint, every complex system that made modern aircraft carriers functional. This approach had served Japan well during peacetime, producing warships of exceptional quality and durability. But it would prove catastrophically inadequate in a war where the ability to return damaged vessels to combat quickly would prove more valuable than perfect craftsmanship. American naval repair philosophy represented a complete rejection of traditional maritime craftsmanship in favor of industrial efficiency and standardized procedures. Pearl Harbor's naval repair facilities had been designed not as traditional shipyards, but as industrial plants capable of treating warship repair as a manufacturing process. Instead of relying on individual craftsmen to diagnose and fix each problem, American repair crews used standardized procedures, interchangeable parts, and assembly line techniques that could restore combat capability in days rather than months. The most revolutionary aspect of this approach was the concept of battle damage repair, the idea that warships didn't need to be restored to perfect condition, only returned to combat effectiveness as quickly as possible. Where Japanese repair crews aimed for perfection, American crews aimed for speed, accepting good enough solutions that would keep ships fighting rather than pursuing flawless restoration that would keep them in port. This fundamental difference in repair philosophy would prove more decisive than ship design or crew training, because it determined how quickly each navy could return damaged vessels to the fight. The first indication that Japanese intelligence had seriously underestimated American repair capabilities came just days after Pearl Harbor, when reconnaissance flights reported that several American warships presumed to be permanently disabled were already showing signs of activity. The battleship Nevada, which Japanese pilots had seen burning and apparently sinking, was somehow back in dry dock with repair crews swarming over her hull. The cruiser Helena, struck by a torpedo that should have required months of yard time to repair properly, was reportedly conducting sea trials less than 3 weeks after the attack. Most puzzling of all, the destroyer Shaw, whose forward magazine had exploded in a spectacular fireball that Japanese newsreels had used as proof of American naval vulnerability, was not only afloat but apparently seaworthy. These reports forced Japanese naval intelligence to revise their estimates of American repair capabilities. But they still assumed that hastily repaired ships would be inferior to properly restored vessels and would require additional maintenance that would keep them out of sustained combat operations. The revelation that shattered Japanese assumptions about naval repair came during the Battle of Midway, when the carrier Yorktown appeared in the American task force despite intelligence reports that she had been severely damaged during the Coral Sea engagement just weeks earlier. Japanese naval experts had calculated that Yorktown's battle damage would require at least 3 months of careful repair work at a major naval facility. Yet here she was, not only operational, but apparently ready for sustained combat operations. What Japanese commanders didn't know was that Pearl Harbor's repair crews had accomplished what their own naval yards would have considered impossible. They had restored a heavily damaged aircraft carrier to combat readiness in just 72 hours. This achievement represented more than superior industrial organization. It demonstrated a completely different philosophy about the relationship between perfection and effectiveness in naval warfare. The Yorktown's rapid repair had been accomplished through techniques that violated every principle of traditional naval craftsmanship. Instead of removing damaged sections and rebuilding them to original specifications, American repair crews used steel patches, welded reinforcements, and temporary fixes that restored structural integrity without requiring perfect restoration. Damaged electrical systems were bypassed rather than completely rewired. Twisted steel frames were straightened and reinforced rather than replaced with precision-manufactured components. Most revolutionary of all, entire damaged sections were simply sealed off and ignored if they didn't affect the ship's basic combat capability. The carrier that emerged from this 72-hour marathon was not the same ship that had entered Pearl Harbor's repair basin, but it was fully capable of launching and recovering aircraft, defending itself against enemy attack, and participating in major fleet operations. Japanese naval experts would have considered such repairs to be dangerous compromises that would inevitably lead to catastrophic failure under combat stress. Instead, Yorktown proved that good enough could be more valuable than perfect if it meant the difference between fighting and waiting. The psychological impact of American repair speed became evident in the changing tone of Japanese naval reports throughout 1942 and 1943. Pilots returning from missions began describing encounters with American warships that should have been in repair yards for months but were somehow back in combat operations. Intelligence officers struggled to explain how American carriers that had been confirmed as heavily damaged were appearing in task forces within weeks of their reported injuries. Most disturbing of all, the rate of American ship repair seemed to be accelerating rather than slowing as the war progressed, suggesting that American naval yards were not just fixing individual ships, but perfecting a system of rapid restoration that could return entire fleets to combat readiness faster than Japanese forces could inflict damage. These reports forced Japanese naval planners to confront a strategic reality that invalidated their entire approach to naval warfare. The Americans had created a system of ship repair that made traditional calculations about attrition warfare meaningless. The moment that completed the transformation of Japanese thinking about American naval capabilities came during the Guadalcanal campaign, when reconnaissance flights reported the presence of multiple American carriers that Japanese intelligence had written off as permanently disabled. The Enterprise, heavily damaged during the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, was back in action within weeks, despite battle damage that should have required months of careful restoration. The Saratoga, torpedoed by a Japanese submarine and presumed to be out of action for the remainder of the war, was not only operational but apparently in better condition than before her injury. Most incredibly, new American carriers were appearing in the Pacific at a rate that suggested American shipyards were not just repairing damaged vessels, but were producing new warships, faster than Japanese intelligence had calculated was mathematically possible. The Americans had not simply learned to repair ships quickly. They had created an industrial system that could replace combat losses faster than any enemy could inflict them. The strategic implications of American repair superiority became undeniably clear during the final years of the Pacific War, when Japanese naval forces found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to possess an inexhaustible supply of combat-ready warships. American carriers that had been damaged in major battles were returning to combat within weeks, while Japanese carriers that suffered similar damage remained in port for months or were never repaired at all due to shortages of skilled craftsmen and proper materials. The Battle of the Philippine Sea demonstrated the practical consequences of this disparity. The Americans could afford to risk their carriers in aggressive operations because they knew that damaged ships would be back in action quickly, while Japanese commanders had to husband their remaining vessels because each loss was effectively permanent. The same industrial philosophy that had enabled 72-hour carrier repairs was now being applied to every aspect of naval operations, creating an American fleet that could sustain combat losses that would have crippled any traditional navy. In his post-war memoir, Admiral Nagumo would write, "We fought the Americans as if naval warfare was still governed by the ancient rules that made each warship a precious, irreplaceable asset. They fought us as if warships were industrial products that could be repaired, modified, and replaced using the same techniques that built automobiles and refrigerators. When we damaged their carriers, we expected them to disappear for months, while craftsmen slowly restored them to perfect condition. Instead, they returned to battle within days, scarred but functional, ready to fight again. We learned too late that in modern war, speed of repair is more valuable than perfection of craftsmanship. The Americans didn't just fix their ships faster than we could damage them. They created a new form of naval warfare, where industrial efficiency mattered more than traditional seamanship. That was a lesson we never learned, and it cost us the war.